was flicking through the news cycle today and I read this headline that got my attention. The league has warned clubs over side deals relating to bidding on top father-son and academy prospects like Levi Ashcroft, Leo Lombard and Isaac Kako ahead of November's national draft. The sneaky side deal. I have been wanting to do a video about the AFL's controversial bidding system and the draft value index for quite a while, so I thought this was a pretty good place to start, so let's get stuck in. Once again, I thank Deakin University for powering this video. Deakin is home to the world's #1 sports science school for 3 years running now. I'm teaming up with Deakin University in the lead up to this year's draft to bring you even better videos. So in this article, John Ralph is referring to the potential underhanded deals that may manipulate or change the value of father-son and academy selections in this upcoming draft. Now, this conversation is not a new one. This practically happens every year, and it's easy to see why. Most clubs that have father-son and academy selections at the top end of the draft don't end up paying market value for those players like the system is designed. And in this video, I want to explore why that is the case. But first, I'm going to lay down some context. In 2024, we really do have everything. It's the smorgasbord of draft compromise, the trifecta of draft compromise. The father-son is the first one. It's really a timeless classic, popularised heavily by Geelong in the early 2000s. The AFL had to step in there after the 07 Premiership runaway 119-point win. Levi Ashcroft heads this crop. He's touted by many as a #1 pick. And he's going straight to the champions Brisbane, which is shockingly controversial. The second is the Northern Academy compromise, more of a contemporary compromise this one, particularly since 2023. This year it's Leo Lombard, and he's definitely a top 5 to 10 prospect, makes it even spicier. And then there's your NGA, which is your most rare form of compromise. The changes this year have brought it back into vogue. Isaac Kako will be heading to Essendon as an NGA player, and he'll be the first player in some years to go to a club as a first-round NGA prospect. So those are, I want to say, the main points of compromise in an AFL draft. I think there's just one funny little irony in this whole thing, that these players will enter November's national draft, but they'll only be able to be selected by their nominated club, but it will be the 17 other clubs that will actually determine their draft value. And that happens through the bidding system. The bidding system works pretty intuitively, and you can see it as a relationship existing with the DVI or draft value index. Every player nominates for the draft, even the father-son and academy players. And essentially when it's your club's pick, if you fancy a father-son or an academy player, you bid on them. The pick that you bid on them with determines the exact draft value, and the club tied to the player can then match. For example, pick 1 equals 3,000 points, pick 2, 2,517 points, and they gradually get lower until you get to pick 73, which is worth just 9 points. The draft value index has 2 major purposes. The first one is just to create an overall economy within the points for when clubs trade picks, and the second one is for the actual bidding on NGA, academy players, and father-sons. It sounds complicated, but the main points are this. The rival club sets the draft pick value by bidding, and the nominated club must match the bid with points. Here's a practical example for you. In 2021, the Bulldogs had highly touted prospect Sam Darcy nominate them as a father-son. Now, ultimately, everyone knows he's going to get to the Western Bulldogs, but the DVI and bidding system mean that rivals get to determine his value by bidding when their selection comes around. They don't actually need the draft pick that matches the bid, they just need the points attached to that pick. They can do this in several ways. In this example, it was the Giants who bid on Darcy with pick 2, which was worth 2,517 points, which the Dogs promptly matched. A 20% discount for first round bid matches was applied, don't ask, eventually making it 2,014 points that the Dogs needed to find. Using picks 34, 42, 43, 44 and 45, which equaled up to 2,024 points, the Dogs got the job done. As I said, the club matching doesn't need the actual draft pick to match, they just need the points. There is a little bit of a catch though. The team must use the points from their next available draft pick in the order to match. Teams have become extremely resourceful with this detail. That's why you saw Essendon trade away their pick 9 and Gold Coast their pick 6 so as to not get eaten up by Kako or Lombard bids in this year's draft. Okay, so that's all the mechanisms of how the draft value index is related to the bidding system. I told you all of that information because it's important in understanding how teams can manipulate the system and activate the side deal. Everything I just told you sounds wonderful in theory, but when the mechanism to set the value is determined by 17 other clubs, it's pretty much impossible to eradicate self-interest and bias, and that's what we're going to talk about here with these deals. So let's start with Levi Ashcroft, who is widely considered to be a top 3 pick. Now, I have him at 5 in my rankings, a little bit further down. That's probably more of a unique character thing, but respected people like Toomey have him as high as number 1 in this draft, and there's several clubs that rate him extremely highly. Now, Richmond, who hold pick 1, pick 6, pick 10, they could even get up to pick 2 and hold picks 1 and 2 in this draft, are the club that you certainly would expect could make a bid on Levi Ashcroft to make the Premiers Brisbane pay for this guy. But the dangling carrot of the side bid may have got to them here. So I've got another example for you. The same draft 2021, the phenomenon that is Nick Dacos was in that draft too, remember? But inexplicably that year, the bid didn't come until the Gold Coast Suns at pick 4. Now, why on earth wouldn't you want to bid on a generational midfielder like Nick Dacos, who would go on to propel Collingwood to a prelim final the year after, and then a premiership win, obviously, in 2023? Well, if you remember, the Giants were well placed at pick 2 that year to bid on Dacos, who was largely seen as the best available talent in that draft. The Giants, rather ironically here, actually bid on Sam Darcy, the father-son to Western Bulldogs, like I said. But if we follow the paper trail, the lack of a bid on Dacos was probably set in stone a year earlier, when Collingwood sent that pick 2 that the Giants ended up having in 2021 to the Giants for picks 24 and 30. This was a way for Collingwood. Remember I talked about wasting the pick and why Essendon and the Gold Coast got out of the first round? Collingwood did the same thing a year earlier with their Dacos pick. Now, I can't claim this as a fact, but it's very likely in that deal for pick 2 that went to the Giants for pick 24 and 30, it's very likely that there was a handshake deal involved in that where they said, we're not going to bid on Nick Dacos, the generational talent, as well. And this is what I'm talking about when I talk about self-interest. There's not enough of an incentive for the Giants to actually make that bid, and there's more of an incentive for them to try to get what they can out of it, which was pick 2. We fast forward to 2024, and an eerily similar deal happened this year, where Brisbane sent their pick 20, their first rounder, to the Tigers in exchange for a large quantity of late picks so that Brisbane could match the bids on Sam Marshall and Levi Ashcroft. And again, I clearly don't have facts on this, but it's likely that a under-the-table handshake may have happened between Brisbane and Richmond, where Richmond got what they want and said, we're not going to bid on Levi Ashcroft. Like I said, nobody knows for sure, but there's certainly room for a side deal there. I'm not just singling out Richmond and Brisbane here. I think the other 2 deals on the table were obviously the Gold Coast Richmond one, where the Gold Coast likely said to Richmond, don't bid on Lombard and we'll give you pick 6 and 23 for Dan Rioli. And the other one, of course, was the pick 9 Isaac Kako Melbourne. Melbourne holding picks 5 and 9 in this year's draft now. They're probably not going to bid on Kako. Now, as well as the potential for a side deal, Richmond also have another major reason why you wouldn't want to bid on a father-son or an academy prospect, and that is the prestige and the trust of the number 1 pick. That 2021 draft really does have everything for us in the examples. Now, that year, North Melbourne picked Jason Horne-Francis with the number 1 pick. They did not bid on Nick Dacos. Why do we think that is? I think there's 2 reasons embedded in this. One is telling Jason Horne-Francis, you're the absolute guy for us. We don't rate Nick Dacos higher than you. And the second is just that little bit of financial element. There is a $10,000 bonus for being named or your name called out as the number 1 draft pick. And bidding on an academy or a father-son prospect essentially is handing over $10,000 to a rival player for no reason. There is, like I said, just that other element of trust. And you look at that example in 2020 where Adelaide did make the bid at number 1 for Jamari Ugle-Hagan, the NGA player, instead of taking Riley Thilthorpe with the number 1 overall pick. You know, there is a bit of speculation around how that was damaging to Riley Thilthorpe, just not giving him that absolute trust. And while I do think Adelaide did the right thing in making the Western Bulldogs pay if they thought that player was the number 1 pick, there is little value in that for them. They could just pick Riley Thilthorpe, give him the extra money incentive, say you're the absolute guy, and there's almost more value in that for them than taking a a different player. And Richmond will have to wrestle with this situation this year. Do we bid on Ashcroft and make Brisbane pay, hurt a rival, or do we just kind of do our own thing here and give our player the $10,000 extra, give him the mantle, give him the prestige of the number one pick? That's what they're going to have to turn over between now and the draft. And the third reason is, of course, protecting future deals. Now, this one gets talked about a lot in the media. This is my least favorite and the most flimsy of all the reasons, in my opinion. I just think this is peak self-interest, peak conservatism, that if I do this, it might hurt me down the track. I don't love this one, and you kind of see it in society all the time, don't you? It's like that sort of idea of not speaking up because somebody else is going to do it for you. I'm not going to involve myself in this. I'm going to make it somebody else's problem. And I think that's what a lot of clubs do to try to protect themselves. I hate this reason, but ultimately I'm sure it does play on clubs' minds. So the final thing to touch on here would be my takes on these things. I think the father-son, I'm not a massive fan of the father-son personally. I mean, it's something that's been around since the 1950s. It's not as if it's been around since the dawn of AFL. I know a lot of people vibe with the romanticism of, you know, a kid coming through, playing for their boyhood club, playing for the same club that their father did. There is something kind of cool about that, but when you've got an equalisation system built into your game like the draft, I just don't think it works very well. As for the Northern Academies, I do think they're a necessary evil in the fight to sort of take over the country with AFL being the major game. I think the answer to some of those problems is to push these equalisation policies, push the fact that teams have to get up the draft board and actually pay a fair market value for these players. I don't think that exists with being able to stack the picks, and that's something that the AFL moving into 2025 has worked on to try to remove some of those little tricks and sneaky ways clubs can go around that. So I think that applies also to the NGAs. Again, I think the program makes sense. It works. It brings players from different backgrounds, different athletes into the game that ultimately make the game more professional and better, in my opinion. So that is a wrap for this video, guys. Once again, I thank Deakin University for powering this video. Deakin is home to the world's #1 sports science school for the last 3 years running. Tell me what you think about some of these deals. Are they still going on? Is it something that the AFL's got on top of now? Where do you think that Levi Ashcroft, Isaac Kako, and Leo Lombard will get bids? Let me know in the comments below, and I'll see you next time.